It will not be an exaggeration to say that the precedent we are talking about today is unique and one of a kind. 3 legendary authors, divided by decades, are collaborating on one story. The first one started the journey to the unknown. The second one repeated it, but rationalized it. And the third one, well, turned it into madness, as usual. Make yourself comfortable, my friends, as today Edgar Poe, Jules Verne, and H.P. Lovecraft are taking us to the Antarctic expedition. So, what can go wrong during journey to the Antarctic? Well, basically everything, as it's a place of certain limits where, maps end, logic weakens, and perception collapses. But each author treats that space differently. Poe sees it as a mystery, Verne as a quest worth solving, and H.P. Lovecraft as a dangerous revelation. Poe's narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym is not just an adventure story, it's a gradual collapse of reality. The main hero is quite an unstable young man who finds himself in dangerous situations and always survives by pure luck. He encounters lots of unpleasant situations, including storms and eating human meat, So the person who has very little control of his own life moves south, and the world around him becomes increasingly unstable. Whiteness without clarity, warmth where cold should be. Even the sound in the final chapters possesses no meaning. Tekelili, tekelili, with no translation and no explanation. And then the famous ending. But there arose in our pathway a shrouded human figure very far larger in its proportions than any dweller among men, and the hue of the skin of the figure was of the perfect whiteness of the snow. And then the story ends. No explanation, no resolution, just silence. Decades later, Jules Verne steps in to explain the unexplainable. He writes an Antarctic mystery, or the Sphynx of Ice, if we translate the original title from French. And Jules Verne wasn't just inspired by Poe's story, he wrote the direct continuation. As you can imagine, Edgar Allan Poe left a super mysterious ending, and Jules Verne, being a huge appreciator of Edgar Poe's works, just couldn't leave it that way. He didn't only write gratitude to Poe on the very opening page of his book, but also, what's even more amazing, he mentioned Arthur Pym in Sphynx of Ice, thus creating a sequel to Edgar Poe's story. But of course, he wrote it in his own way. And so, without any hesitation, a gigantic white figure becomes just an enormous rock. It was a rock of enormous size, whose strange configuration might, at a distance, give it the appearance of a gigantic being. So, the unknown becomes just a misinterpretation. Where Edgar Poe suggests that pulling southward was a work of mysterious forces, Jules Verne says, and I quote, "This phenomenon could only be explained by the presence of an enormous magnetic mass, brutally turning fear and chaos into pure physics." While Poe terrifies us with perfect whiteness, Verne talks about the dazzling reflection of the ice produced extraordinary optical effects. So here it's just light, ice, and the nature of perception, nothing supernatural. And what about that horrible, mysterious sound, tekeleli? Well, nothing. It was gone. Monsieur Verne didn't manage to find a rational explanation, and that is why he just removed it from the story. Well, in my opinion, it would be possible to put some Antarctic albatross shouting this or something like that, but, well, who am I to judge the legendary writer, yes? But then comes Howard Phillips Lovecraft, and oh my, here we go again. I'm forced into speech because men of science have refused to follow my advice. By this line we get to know the setting. Something bad happened, and clearly unscientific. Where Poe had no structure at all and Verne had a single object, Lovecraft gives us a full civilization. The effect was that of a cyclopean city of no architecture known to man or to human imagination, with vast aggregations of knee-black masonry embodying monstrous perversions of geometrical laws and attaining the most grotesque extremes of sinister bizarrerie. Oof, I'd live there. The terror of Poe's narration was that he just hinted. Verne poured all his rational enthusiasm on us, erasing the idea of a monster, while Lovecraft describes. It was a terrible, indescribable thing, vaster than any subway train. A shapeless congeries of protoplasmic bubbles, faintly self-luminous, and with myriads of temporary eyes forming and unforming as pustules of greenish light all over the tunnel filling. With the strangest expression of mingled horror, rage, and intense curiosity depicted on their countenances, and shouting at the top of their voices, "Tekelili, tekelili." Barrel-shaped bodies, radiating arms. It's a biology that shouldn't exist and cannot be understood. It's curious that Poe's original tekelili sound returns. But now it has a source, and the context clearly belongs to someone indescribable beyond all ordinary experience. Lovecraft's annihilation of reality doesn't only bring Edgar Poe's horror back, it amplifies it. It takes the unknown, reveals it, makes it known, and thus crushes the accustomed reality by its terrifying wrongness. Edgar Poe, of course, was familiar with the topic of madness, yet in the Arthur Pym's story he only implies that some kind of a monster could possibly exist. Where Howard Phillips Lovecraft turns the volume of terror to the maximum, making knowledge, not a mystery, the biggest source of damage. To fully understand why these authors treat the same story so differently, we need to step back and look at the world where they were writing. Edgar Allan Poe writes in the beginning of the 19th century, in the end of the era of Romanticism, and like in the epicenter of the Gothic tradition, where the center of attention is human emotion, especially fear, especially irrational fear. This is the world where unknown doesn't have to be explored or conquered, it just has to be experienced. Decay, madness, and isolation are one of the greatest features of Gothic traditions, as well as encounters with incomprehensible. So when Edgar Poe reaches Antarctica with his main hero, he doesn't try to explain what happened, he just leaves it unresolved, because for Edgar Poe, the limit of knowledge is the whole point of narration. Jules Verne creates in a completely different world in the late 19th century, which is defined by industrialization, technological breakthroughs, global exploration, and faith in science, of course. This is the period of time when the map is being filled in and expanded, nature is being measured, mysteries are expected to have answers. So when Jules Verne reads the narration of Arthur Gordon Pym by Edgar Poe, he doesn't see it as a horror story, like oh la la, quel cauchemar. No, he sees the problem to solve first and foremost. And so we see this rock of enormous size, magnetic mass, etc., etc. Because in Verne's world, nothing is totally unknowable, only not yet explained and explored. H.P. Lovecraft writes after World War I, in a world that has lost its certainty, where science has advanced but so have war, destruction, and existential doubt as a result. The collapse of human-centered reality is another thing the 20th century brought. Human being has suddenly realized how miserable and weak it was in front of vast, indifferent, and probably dangerous universe. Well, as you can see, Lovecraft is the undeniable product of his time. When he returns to Antarctica, he doesn't attempt to rewrite Jules Verne's vision, he goes further. He shows that science doesn't eliminate horror. It's something that reveals it. I truly see it as a phenomenon in the world of literature, like, philosophical progression. Because Edgar Poe says there is something that we cannot understand. Then Jules Verne says we just cannot understand it yet, we have to explore it. And then comes Howard Phillips Lovecraft and says that we are not even supposed to understand it. So it's like a same journey, but in different centuries and within different truths, from mystery to explanation and then to madness. Thank you very much for watching. I'm planning to make a separate video with comparison of Edgar Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, and I promise you it's going to be very interesting. And stay tuned. Thank you so much.